I thank the honourable member for Parramatta. The question now is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Braddon.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Parramatta for giving a very detailed account of these changes that will have an impact on the childcare system of this country. And as a parent who has used childcare continuously over the last 10 years, some of the issues that the member for Parramatta raised are of significant concern for families if this bill is to be passed. And I'd also like to agree with the member for Parramatta in her contribution in that, particularly around childcare, we need to see more debate, more investigation, more attention on just this one part of this Omnibus bill. And I think when I first read this bill, I said to myself, wow, I know it's an Omnibus bill, but goodness me, there are so many measures in here that will have such a detrimental impact on so many Australians. And it's a real shame that we have a government that calls about, they talk about those that will benefit from this bill. Well, let's talk about those that won't benefit from this bill. And these are some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And I know that this legislation will have a devastating impact on the people in my community and the people of Braddon, in an electorate where we have poor health outcomes. We have relatively high unemployment, particularly in youth unemployment. We also have very low education attainment rates in my community, and this bill will hit those people the hardest. And it makes me very sad to stand here in this place today and talk about what this bill will do for them. It will be devastating. And I think when you're talking about regional communities, they generally are older, they generally earn less, and they do have a greater reliance on government support. And all I see since being elected to this place in a relatively short amount of time is this constant attack from this government on those people. What I really struggle to understand is those sitting on the opposite side, those members of the National Party, if they can go back to their electorates, can they go back and look those families, those young people, those pensioners in the eye and say that this bill is good for them? The National Party are heroes at home but are cowards when it comes to being in Canberra. Last week I spoke about how regional inequality is becoming more entrenched in Australia, where we're having the gap of inequality between those in the urban areas and those in regional areas, like in my electorate, has never been this big in the last 75 years. That gap is widening every day. And this legislation will further entrench that inequality. It will affect families, working mums, pensioners and young people, and contains a deterrent for young people to find work. In some sort of sick game that was previously a bipartisan approach to the NDIS, that has now been abandoned, and that again is a terrible, terrible shame. And this is also that the government can fund a $50 billion tax cut to big business. It makes me question about priorities. When I come in this place, I look at my community and see what priorities they need. Access to good health, access to good education, jobs, fair wage for the work that they do, and support from a government that cares. And I really don't think that this government is living up to any of that. The Murdoch press and those opposite say that this side, that we're engaging in a politics of envy. But this is the politics of reality. The reality is that we live in regional areas. The reality is that every dollar we have to spend it on something that just enables us to live day in, day out. It's the reality of what it means to simply just get by. This is what I am faced every day in my electorate. When I go out knocking on the doors, I hear stories of people struggling to make ends meet every single day. But I'm particularly really disappointed that those opposite, and especially those members from regional electorates, are not standing up for the people that they represent by supporting this bill. They sit mutely and are prepared to green flag these cruel, heartless, out-of-touch cuts. Even more bizarrely, they're being stitched up by their own coalition colleagues on one nation preferences, and still they do nothing. So tell the Prime Minister you've had enough, that you're sick and tired of being taken for granted, and join this side of the House when it comes to the inevitable decision on this legislation. Just for once, those in the National Party, be a hero at home and a hero in Canberra. Don't begrudge those families from Eastern Sydney, Toorak or the North Shore. No doubt many have worked hard to enjoy the quality of life that they do. But I do begrudge it when the local members seek to punish families in electorates like mine that are not so fortunate. The government admits that their family payment cuts will leave 1.5 million Australian families worse off. But what do these cuts to family tax benefits mean to the people of my electorate of Braddon in northwest and the west coast of Tasmania? Around 8,000 families in Braddon who receive the family tax benefit Part A will be affected by these cuts. 6,335 families will lose $354 as a result of the abolition of the family tax benefit Part B end-of-year supplement. It's one of those things where families who receive this supplement, they plan their budget accordingly. It may be to buy their kids' school uniforms. It may be to help pay some of the bills. And on the day that this Omnibus bill came out into the media, on that very morning, I received an email, a real dose of reality that I'd like to read some of that into Hansard. And this is from Melinda from my electorate. And I quote, "Dear Justine, in regards to the LNP government's proposal to remove family tax benefit B to single parents once their youngest turns 13 and cuts to the reconciliation payments for family tax benefit A and B, these historically were never bonuses. This topic hits close to home. I am a single mum with 100% care of my son who has just turned 12. I returned to part-time work with him when he was 6 months old, and I am still working. I don't rent my home, I have a mortgage. Here is someone that actually has a mortgage that is going to be so hardly hit by these cuts. It makes me wonder if they're ever going to be able to service that mortgage." Continue to quote, "I struggle every day with making ends meet. I don't drink or smoke or really have a social life. My money goes on the mortgage, power, phone, water and food. Going back to school this year has been extremely hard financially without the back to school bonus. Please don't let them take the family tax benefit away from us too. I rely on that money to pay the registration for my car and assist with paying my council rates. Please, Justine, please stick up for those of us doing our best for our kids." Now that is such a heartfelt letter from someone who just heard the news that morning that these changes were going to happen and they're going to hit her in that way. These are the real-life examples that I think every single one of us in this place need to listen to, need to respond to, need to react to, and not pass this bill. Labor will stand up for Melinda and so many other families. I challenge the Prime Minister or a Tasmanian Liberal Senator to go and visit Melinda, to knock on her door and explain why she should take this cut to fund a corporate tax handout. I think they would be lucky to get past the front gate. The Prime Minister's plan to punish low-income working families does not just stop with them. Pensioners, people with disabilities, carers and New Start recipients will be hit with the abolition of the energy supplement. And I've heard some members on the other side say, "Oh, with the carbon tax gone, the energy supplement should go." Well, when you come from a state that has the highest electricity bill in the country, that extra payment helps pay for a bill like that. It helps pay for the rates. It helps pay for the water and sewerage. And yet we're going to see pensioners and people on these payments worse off because they won't have that money. And some people might think, "Oh, that's not a lot of money," but it makes a hell of a difference to these people. My electorate is one of the oldest in terms of age of the population in Australia. They have already expressed their disgust at the Prime Minister's plan to have them work until they drop at 70. But instead of supporting them in their retirement, this Prime Minister wants to punish them. This government wants to create a two-tier system of pensioners. But like a bad dream, there is more of those struggling in the community. This government wants young job seekers to live on nothing for 5 weeks. Youth unemployment is also disproportionately high in regions, so once again it will be people living outside of the cities that suffer. Once again, the National Party and Regional Liberal Party members are happy to let down young people in their communities. Labor has opposed this overly harsh measure before, and we will again. The government always talks about young people and those on benefits that need to study or work. But the Prime Minister, aided and abetted by the National Party, wants to remove the Pensioner Education Supplement and Education Entry Payment, a small payment that goes some way to supporting people on income support who are trying to get ahead. Just goes to show how out of touch and mean-spirited these people are. But the most extraordinary and callous and cruel thing that this government is doing is tying the funding of the NDIS to these cuts, playing off one vulnerable group of Australians against another. And I'd just like to read a small little snippet that was in the Examiner newspaper from the TASCOS Chief Executive Kim Goods, who said that we are seeing a federal government that appears to want to attack people who are on welfare. She said TASCOS were appalled that the coalition was allegedly implying the NDIS would experience a funding shortfall if the Omnibus bill was not passed. And this is an organisation that's there to advocate on behalf of those that are vulnerable in our community, that are less fortunate, and they are absolutely disgusted with what this government is attempting to achieve. Rather than me talking on about this, I would like to speak on behalf of a mum in my electorate, Lynn, and talk about what the NDIS means to her family and her son, Mitchell. In her own words, Lynn has summed up why tying this bill to the NDIS is so wrong, and I quote, "From the moment they placed Mitchell on my stomach, I had this gut feeling that something was so wrong. I just didn't know what or how, but I just knew. After 3.5 years, Mitchell was referred to a paediatrician and then to a geneticist, and on the 17th of November 1998, he was diagnosed with a rare syndrome called floating harbour syndrome. Our paediatrician told us that Mitchell was the 12th in the world to be diagnosed. Because we needed to get help, we weren't entitled to anything. We were just told, we don't have the funds, or he isn't that bad. I just kept my ear to the ground and was hopeful that another piece of legislation like Medicare was coming to help people. Well, Mitchell got a letter saying we had an appointment with our NDIS coordinator and we couldn't wipe the smile off our face. We were so excited. What is it that when you have a child with a disability, you never have a life? We never had support apart from my mum, who died 17 years ago. And so we call upon politicians who make up the so-called government, who I didn't vote for, because you treat us people like we're dirt. And we wouldn't give us the time of day, and who wouldn't guarantee that Medicare and the NDIS wouldn't be touched. You tell us to live within our means. Well, how do I tell our sons and daughters who have a disability to do that when you can't? Let me help you, Prime Minister. Don't give the multimillionaires a tax cut of $50 billion. Tell them to live within their means. I can't afford a trip to Canberra, but I'd love to have my say to you and the government. How cruel you lot are to begrudge the most vulnerable some taxpayer dollars to make a little bit happier for them. Think with your heart, it won't kill you." End of quote. Mr.